The man was horrified to discover that the ancient armor he had stumbled upon had locked itself onto his body and fitted itself automatically. But when he tried to take it off, he realized the armor had seemingly fused with his flesh. Even more disturbing, that very night, wave after wave of demonic spirits began relentlessly attacking him at his door. Aurel was a world-famous French rapper, and his grueling work schedule was pushing him to the edge of a mental breakdown. Hoping to release his pent-up stress and prepare for the arrival of their first child, he and his Japanese wife bought an old wooden cabin at the foot of Mount Fuji. They wanted a peaceful retreat where they could escape the pressures of everyday life and finally relax. The couple were delighted with the old property. Although there was a long dried-up well sitting right in the middle of the main room, they paid little attention to it and focused instead on renovating the house. After several days of hard work, the cabin was completely transformed. Once everything was finished, Aurel finally turned off airplane mode on his phone so he could catch up on work-related messages. While looking around the room, however, his attention was suddenly drawn to a ghostly mask with a deathly pale face that seemed to carry an eerie blue tint. At the same time, he noticed countless metal fragments of different shapes and sizes scattered around the old well. Driven by curiosity, he carefully gathered every single piece, brought them upstairs and cleaned them thoroughly. To his surprise, he discovered they were all parts of an ancient Japanese samurai armor set. Unable to resist, Aurel decided to try on the arm guards and leg greaves. The instant he did, the remaining pieces suddenly rose into the air as though responding to an invisible command. They flew directly toward him and locked themselves onto his body automatically. It felt as though Aurel's mind had exploded. A massive wave of dark, negative energy crashed through his consciousness as every painful memory, failure, regret, and heartbreak he had ever experienced replayed inside his mind over and over again. Early the next morning, a dazed Aurel woke up in horror. Every single piece of the armor had burrowed deep into his skin and flesh. He and his wife spent hours desperately trying to remove it. They even used baby oil and vice grips, but nothing worked. The armor refused to come off. With no other choice, Aurel put on an oversized coat to hide the armor and accompanied his wife to the hospital for her prenatal checkup. Strangely, while the nurse enthusiastically explained that their unborn baby was perfectly healthy, Aurel could see something completely different. Although everyone else appeared normal, his vision seemed distorted by strange supernatural images. Believing he was simply suffering from a mental breakdown caused by his exhausting concert tour, he tried to ignore what he had seen. Late that night, however, a pitch-black hand suddenly reached toward his head. A strange noise echoed from downstairs, waking Aurel instantly. He quickly woke his wife. Since they were living in the middle of nowhere, they wondered whether a grizzly bear had somehow wandered into the cabin. Carefully making their way downstairs, they listened as the mysterious sound became louder with every step. Gathering her courage, his wife switched on the lights. What stood before them was clearly not any creature native to Japan. As they stared in complete confusion, wondering whether they were looking at some kind of alien, a horrifying monster made entirely of clay suddenly appeared behind them. Panicking, the couple rushed into their car and sped away into the night. Without warning, a glowing yellow figure suddenly darted across the road directly in front of them. His wife swerved violently to avoid hitting it, causing the car to crash into a flooded rice paddy. Moments later, the clay creature slammed itself against the windshield. Terrified, Aurel jumped out of the vehicle and ran for his life. But the monster relentlessly chased him down, tackled him to the ground, and wrapped its powerful hands tightly around his throat. Just before he lost consciousness, his wife rushed in and struck the creature, managing to save him. Unfortunately, weighed down by the heavy armor fused to his body, Aurel couldn't run very far. Almost immediately, another clay monster appeared from nowhere, tackled him once again and pinned him to the ground. Aurel fought back with all his strength. He kicked the monster as hard as he possibly could, but his foot became firmly stuck inside the creature's clay-like stomach, making escape even more difficult. Early the next morning, his wife remembered a spiritual medium she had known since childhood. The elderly woman was respected for her wisdom and knowledge of the supernatural, so they hoped she might understand what was happening. The couple immediately boarded a train bound for Osaka. However, after leaving the peaceful countryside and entering the bustling city, Aurel suddenly found himself overwhelmed by crushing anxiety. When he noticed a glamorous model posing seductively on a giant digital billboard, an unfamiliar and overwhelming desire suddenly surged through him. Although he managed to suppress the strange impulse, the experience frightened him deeply. Eventually, he and his wife arrived at the restaurant operated by the spiritual medium. The woman was completely blind, yet the very moment Aurel unzipped his coat, she immediately sensed the overwhelming evil aura radiating from the armor. Without even touching it, she knew exactly what it was. She explained that every single piece of the armor had been carved with the images of legendary and incredibly powerful yokai. Even more shocking, the names of Japan's creator deities, Izanagi and Izanami, were engraved on both sides of the chest plate. There was no doubt that the armor carried an extraordinarily dark and ancient history. Its origins stretched all the way back to Japan's Edo period during the 17th century. At that time, an ordinary craftsman named Shirogane lost one of his eyes during a meaningless samurai battle. The overwhelming resentment he felt slowly consumed him, transforming him into a deeply paranoid and emotionally broken man. Sensing his vulnerability, a yokai that fed upon negative human emotions slipped into his mind and amplified every painful feeling tenfold. Desperate to escape his suffering, Shirogane fled deep into the forest. There he encountered a grotesque tree covered with countless human heads. At that moment, the creator deities Izanagi and Izanami appeared before him and presented him with a sacred suit of armor. They claimed it would protect him from the yokai tormenting his mind. Believing he had finally found salvation, Shirogane gratefully accepted the armor. But instead of protecting him, the armor possessed a fatal attraction that drew yokai toward its wearer. Every single night, endless hordes of terrifying spirits hunted him relentlessly. Although Shirogane was an exceptionally skilled fighter, even he could not endure the never-ending attacks forever. Eventually, his wife and children abandoned him. Broken, exhausted, and completely alone, Shirogane finally surrendered. The countless monsters descended upon him and tore him apart. After his death, the cursed armor disappeared, only to resurface centuries later in the abandoned cabin where Oral had unknowingly discovered it. Now understanding the terrible curse, Oral and his wife spent several years preparing themselves after meeting the spiritual medium. When night finally fell, the fully prepared couple waited silently inside the house for the inevitable arrival of the yokai. It did not take long. A grotesque four-armed monster suddenly burst into the room and instantly pinned Oral against the couch, leaving him completely helpless. The monster's body began seeping thick black smoke, quickly filling the room and plunging everything into total darkness. His wife rushed to throw open every door and window, hoping to clear the suffocating smoke from the house. But before they had a chance to recover, the monster slowly climbed back onto its feet as though nothing had happened. Before the exhausted couple could even catch their breath, another yokai suddenly materialized out of nowhere. Unlike the previous monsters, this one had no physical body at all. It existed as a being of pure energy, made entirely of crackling electricity and blinding laser-like light. Desperate to defend themselves, the couple grabbed vase after vase from the walls and hurled them at the creature. The repeated blows enraged it. It unleashed a deafening sonic blast that shook the entire house before violently kicking Oral across the room. The unbearable noise left Oral writhing on the floor in agony, clutching his ears as the piercing sound overwhelmed his senses. His wife quickly turned on the bathtub behind her. During the brief moment of silence that followed, she even stopped to eat a cup of instant noodles to regain a little energy before the next attack. Suddenly, a soft and seductive whisper echoed through Oral's ears. He looked toward the next room and saw the outline of a beautiful woman standing there. Almost as though he had lost control of his own body, he slowly walked toward her. As he got closer, he realized it was the same glamorous model he had seen earlier on the giant billboard in Osaka. What ordinary man could possibly resist such temptation? Completely mesmerized, Oral stepped closer. The mysterious woman slowly backed into the corner before calmly removing her coat. In the blink of an eye, her neck began stretching farther and farther, growing unnaturally long as it slithered toward Oral, ready to coil around him and slowly suffocate him. Just in time, his wife intervened and managed to throw the yokai's detached head down the old dry well. Completely exhausted, the couple collapsed onto the couch. Thankfully, no more monsters appeared for the rest of that night. Early the following morning, his wife carefully sketched every yokai that had attacked them during the previous 2 days. As she examined the drawings together, she made a shocking realization. Every single monster shared a direct connection with Oral himself. The first clay monster looked almost exactly like his father, a man with an obsessive need to control everything around him. Just like Clay, his father's influence had always been impossible to escape. If their trip to Japan had not been kept secret, she believed he would undoubtedly have followed them there. The long-necked female yokai looked exactly like the type of woman Oral found attractive. Another monster had a burning cigarette for a face and carried a liquor bottle in its hand, representing the addictions to smoking and alcohol that Oral had struggled with earlier in his life. The strange energy creature that attacked them with unbearable noise represented the electronic music that Oral devoted his career to creating. No matter how many times they defeated these monsters, they returned every single night. The endless attacks left Oral completely exhausted, both physically and mentally. Eventually, his wife could no longer contain her frustration. Their baby was due to arrive at any moment. Yet instead of spending those precious final days preparing for their child's birth, discussing names, or enjoying each other's company, they had spent every waking moment dealing with monsters and supernatural terror. The overwhelming stress pushed Oral back toward the destructive habits he had worked so hard to overcome years earlier. Then suddenly, a terrified scream echoed from the bathroom. Oral rushed inside and found that his wife had gone into labor. A pool of clear fluid covered the floor. Everything happened so quickly that, before either of them fully understood what was happening, the baby had already been born. But when Oral finally looked closely at the child resting in his arms, he was overcome with overwhelming despair. Unable to process everything that had happened, he stepped outside to get some fresh air. Suddenly, a deep, low voice whispered into his ear, asking whether he truly wanted to know how to remove the cursed armor. Without thinking, Oral followed the mysterious voice deep into the forest. There he encountered yet another yokai. Unlike the others, this creature spoke peacefully. It explained that because of its frightening appearance, it had never been able to make any friends. All it wanted was for someone to accept it. In return, it promised to reveal the secret of removing the cursed armor. With no better option available, Oral chose to trust the strange creature. Finally, he learned the terrifying truth. The armor itself absorbed every bit of negative emotion from its wearer. It then used that accumulated darkness to create the yokai that attacked every night. That was why every monster had represented a different part of Oral's own fears, addictions, desires, and emotional scars. Eventually, the pair arrived before a strange sacred tree. The yokai told Oral that if he made a truly sincere wish to the tree, the armor would immediately fall from his body. Oral stood before the tree and prayed with complete sincerity. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Perhaps, as Oral joked bitterly, the Japanese gods simply did not understand French. Frustrated, he sat beneath the tree and poured out every emotion he had been suppressing for years. He complained about his exhausting career. He expressed his resentment toward what he believed was his wife's inability to understand the pressure he constantly carried. He admitted that the endless negativity inside him had been pushing him closer and closer to complete emotional collapse for a very long time. Suddenly, the tree's branches came alive. They wrapped tightly around Oral's body. Almost instantly, beautiful flowers bloomed from the branches before transforming into strange fruit. The yokai secretly harvested those fruits, which had grown directly from Oral's negative emotions. After consuming them, it transformed into an exact physical copy of Oral himself. Disguised as the famous rapper, the imposter immediately began causing chaos. During a live television appearance, it screamed uncontrollably and even ordered its bodyguards to assault the television host over an insignificant disagreement. Meanwhile, the real Oral hurriedly recorded a video attempting to defend himself and explain the truth. By then he realized he had been completely deceived. The yokai had never intended to help him. Instead, it had tricked him into feeding the sacred tree with his negative emotions so it could consume the resulting fruit and steal his identity. Unfortunately, the truth sounded so unbelievable that Oral knew nobody would ever believe his story. With the help of one of his friends, Oral left Japan and immediately returned to France. He was determined to confront the imposter personally and clear his name before the entire world. Just then, his friend noticed that the fake Oral had started a live stream. Watching the broadcast in horror, Oral realized the imposter was inside his own home. His parents and other family members had been tied up. The creature intended to execute them live in front of tens of thousands of viewers. Without hesitation, Oral raced toward the house as quickly as possible. By the time he arrived, the area outside was already surrounded by police officers and angry protesters. The moment Oral stepped inside the building, everything around him was swallowed by complete darkness. Instantly, every single yokai he had ever encountered materialized around him, forming a circle that trapped him with no possible escape. Meanwhile, the imposter calmly poured gasoline throughout the house, preparing to burn the entire building to the ground. Oral eventually collapsed unconscious. His wife painfully crawled over to him and softly whispered into his ear that their baby was coming, and that a beautiful future was still waiting for them together. Those simple words finally broke the curse. In the very next moment, the armor fused to Oral's body began falling away piece by piece. As each piece separated from him, both Oral and his wife returned to reality. However, the imposter effortlessly stood back up. Everything they had done until then had failed to stop it. By now, Oral had absolutely no strength left to continue fighting. The imposter brutally beat him until his face was covered in blood before mocking him, saying that he would never live long enough to see his own child grow up. But the instant the final piece of the cursed armor finally fell from Oral's body, everything changed. The imposter could no longer draw strength from Oral's negative emotions. Unable to maintain its disguise any longer, the yokai transformed back into its hideous true form. In the blink of an eye, the ancient armor shot high into the air before crashing down onto the monster with tremendous force. The creature was destroyed once and for all. And with that, the movie came to an end.